Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the Knitting in the Round Three Ways. Felicia covered pretty much everything you needed to know. Just one thing, if you didn't get the handout via your email or anything, I will go ahead and post it in the chat, both as a PDF and then as a link. If you're on a mobile device, you need that link. And then if you do have any questions about the stuff we're covering in class, go ahead and type that in the chat and I can answer you directly, or I will pass it on to Darren so he can demonstrate for us on screen there. And now we'll finally let him get started.
All right, welcome to class, everybody. Today, we are going to learn how to knit in the round. And so knitting in the round is different than knitting flat. I mean, the knit stitch and the purl stitch are made in the exact same way, but there are a few differences. So when you knit in the round, what you have to remember, and this will all make more sense as we get into class and you start seeing me work, and it'll really make more sense when you do it yourself. That's when the learning really happens. But knitting in the round, you're always looking at the front of your work. So you never have to turn your work. Like if you're knitting a scarf in the traditional flat way, you knit across, you turn your work, and then you knit back. So you're looking at the front and then the back. But when you're knitting in the round, you're always just going round and round and round and round, and you're always just looking at the front of your work. So it makes it a lot easier to do complicated, or not even complicated, but just techniques like cables and fair isle or lace, because you're always looking at the front of your work and you don't have to work on the back, which sometimes can be hard to decipher when you're doing these different kinds of techniques. So for like fair isle sweaters or a fair isle hat, knitting in the round comes in very handy. Another thing, when you're thinking about knitting in the round, you have to approach it a little differently because you're always working on the front of your work. When you make stockinette stitch, you're going to knit every stitch on every round. So instead of rows, we're now working in rounds. So for stockinette stitch, when you're knitting flat, you knit one row, you turn your work, and then you purl the next row. And what that does, it puts all of your knit stitches on the front and all of your purl stitches on the back. But when you're knitting in the round, because we're always just looking at the front, we're only going to put our knit stitches on the front. So we'll just knit, 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 and that will give us stockinette stitch in the round. And then garter stitch in the round is also kind of backwards. You're going to have to knit one round and then purl one round to create garter stitch. So it's different. It's like upside down world between knitting flat and knitting in the round. So just remember that, and it will make more sense when you see me do it, and then when you do it yourself, it will make a lot more sense. So knitting in the round, you do have to approach it a little bit differently because you're always working on the front of your work. And when you finish your item, like if you're making a hat or if you're making a glove or a baby sock or a sleeve for a sweater, you don't have any seams to sew up. So you're going to be knitting in the round. You're going to be creating tubes. Like, you know, what clothing items do we have that are shaped like tubes? You know, fingers for gloves, sweater sleeves, the body of a sweater, a hat, a cowl, so many things. I want to say almost everything, but it's really not everything. But so many things are like a big poncho, can all be knitted in the round in like a great big tube, no seams. You don't have to do any seaming. So that's a couple of things about to kind of keep in mind when you're knitting in the round. So it is a little bit different. The stitches are made the same way, but how they recreate some of our patterns and our techniques we'll have to think a little bit differently about it. And we're not really doing a pattern today. We're not really going to review a pattern or have a hat that we're making. We're doing a technique class, so we're just learning the techniques today. But I did have some yarn that I wanted to talk about. This is one of my favorite yarns for making hats and for knitting with because it's such a nice big thick yarn. This one is called Hometown Bonus Bundle, and it comes in a lot of really great colors. It's available on michaels.com and on lionbrand.com. So you can go there and see all the wonderful colors, different patterns, different like tweeds. There's all kinds of different fun things. That's a very thick yarn. Wool-Ease is a classic. Everybody knows and loves the traditional Wool-Ease, and this is a thinner yarn. And this is also great for hats, for gloves, for sweaters, depending on what type of project you want, but great for all projects. And again, it's on lionbrand.com or michaels.com. And this one comes in so many really good colors. We could use Heartland. Scarpy is a fun one because it's a self-striping. And so you get these different shades of yellow and cream that work up together. And then Woolly's Thick and Quick is always a good choice. It's one of the probably the more popular ones. It's been around probably one of the this and Woolly's are probably been around maybe some of the longer ones. So it's a classic. Everybody loves it. So just some options. Pretty much any yarn that you want to use with this. Knitting in the round, you can certainly use it. You just want to double check whatever pattern you have and make sure that you're using the right size yarn for that pattern. So that's just a really brief little, some little information about knitting in the round before we get started. Are there any questions about anything we've talked about? Or are we ready to jump in and see the technique? How are we doing, Claire?
Let's go for it.
Okay, so let's go ahead and switch the view to the view of my hands. Okay, I'm using for demonstrations today. I am using the Heartland. I'm sorry, not Heartland. It's Hometown bonus bundle, and this is Dallas Gray is the one that I'm using. And I love using this yarn for teaching because it works up fast and the stitches are pretty easy to see. So that's what I'm using right now. And it's nice to have a stitch marker handy. So we're going to be covering 3 different ways of knitting in the round. First, I'm going to show you how to start a project just on circular needles. We're going to review double pointed needles and we're going to review magic loop. So knitting needles, as you're familiar with, always come in a certain size. So we have our traditional sizes, like size 1 or size 0, and it goes clear up to 50. So we're familiar with those. Some people might look at the millimeters, and that's fine. They're the same sizes, but they're just kind of marked in different ways. But when you're knitting in the round on circular needles, you're going to have to start thinking about how long these needles are. And so these are from tip to tip. It's 16 inches long from tip to tip, and that becomes very important. So this is, I think this is a size 11. So that's the size of the needle. That's how thick the needle is. And then it's 16 inches long. So there's 2 different measurements you're going to need to think about when you're knitting in the round. Okay. I kind of have this class set up to show you how to knit in the round, thinking about hats, because hats are very popular projects. And then once you learn how to make a hat in the round, you can take that information and knit anything in the round. So it's kind of, because hats are such common projects, that's kind of how I'm building it up. So for a hat, and this again will make more sense as you practice and you see the class, you want a knitting needle that is 16 inches long. Most people's heads are about 16 inches to maybe 23 inches around. So 16-inch circular is perfect for that. If I wanted to make a very, very large tube, like maybe for a poncho or a great big cowl, I could keep casting on stitches and I could jam stitches on this and maybe make a hat, or not a hat, but like a cowl or something that's like 40 inches round. But, and I can just jamming more and more on, but you can't make it smaller. You can't, I mean, if this needle, instead of 16 inches long, if it were like 32 inches long, you couldn't make a hat very well on that, because you can't make it smaller because the stitches wouldn't stretch around 30 inches because your hat's only going to be like 19 inches when it's done. Now I say that, but there's always an exception, and we're going to talk about that at the end of class, how you can use an extra long needle to make tiny, tiny little tubes, but that's towards the end. That's a slightly more advanced technique. So just remember, you need to think about how thick the needle is and also how long your needle is going to be. And usually the pattern will tell you you need like a size 11, 16-inch needle, and you just want to make sure you're following the pattern's advice. That's very important. It might not seem as important, but as you practice, you'll kind of learn that, hopefully not the hard way, but maybe, you know, it'll start to make more sense. All right. Any questions about needle length and why that matters, or any questions about, it can be very confusing. I understand that. How we doing?
I think we're doing good so
Doing good?
far.
Okay. And all this will make more sense as you are practicing. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to join it in the round. So instead of knitting back and forth, we're going to be knitting in a spiral in a circle. So we have to make sure we're joining it correctly. There's a couple of things we have to watch out for. So after you cast on how many stitches you want, whatever that number is, I want you to lay your work down in this U shape. And I want you to just look at your stitches and make sure that they are not twisted. And this is crucial. So if you look at my stitches, you can see like the loops that are going around the needle are all facing this way. And then my kind of V-shaped stitches are all on the inside. It's very smooth. It's very well ordered. Now, if it's like this, you can see I've just put a twist in it. Hopefully you can see that. So you can see that this is my kind of knit stitches, my kind of V shapes. And you can see it goes under and it picks up here and then it comes back around. And my loops aren't all lined up even because right here it's not. So I think glares too much, but it's not right. So we want to make sure, and we can go ahead and untwist that. And you will see that your stitches are all facing the same way, and the loops, and you could have them on the outside, you could have it opposite, but I like to do it this way. So just make sure everything is nice and flat and nothing is twisted. Now, that being said, for different projects other than hats, sometimes you do want to twist, like sometimes for a headband or for other projects, you might want a twist in it. So if you do want a twist, the pattern will say, you know, cast on twisting your stitches once to put a twist in, and that's all you do. So that's with a twist. Sometimes that's what you want, but for a hat, you do not want that. So and this is very important. So make sure you lay it out flat, no twist. And then it's nice, I don't always use a stitch marker, but it's nice to just put a stitch marker on. And that will, of course, show us where our beginning and our end of the round is. So we know when we finished a whole round when we get to the stitch marker. So when you lay your project out like this, you want your working yarn coming from the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, there's no working yarn. So the working yarn is coming from the right. I got my stitch marker. And then when I pick up my work, the very first stitch that I make, if everything is going right, and I always pull the first two stitches a little tighter than I might normally, nothing extreme, but just pull them just a little more tight than I might normally. So I'm going to knit 2 stitches. And pulling it just, I don't usually give it that extra tug, but like the first 2 or 3, I might when I'm knitting in the round. And then you want to try to pull it apart. And you can see I can't pull it apart. It's connected right here. So that means I joined my work successfully. So I've joined it in the round successfully. So let me show, I always like to show you how to do it wrong, because then when if you mess up later, which you probably will, I mean, I do sometimes still, you'll understand what happened. So sometimes it's nice to see what went wrong. So I'm going to lay my work out incorrectly. I'm going to lay it, now my working yarn is coming from the left. I'm going to put my stitch marker on to hold, and I'm going to make my first couple of knit stitches. Pull a little more snug. I'm having a nice time. Everything's going so well. And then I always stop to double check. It's not joined. So I did not join my work. So I want to talk about this just for a second, because you have a couple of options when you're knitting in the round, or when you're knitting on circular needles. So if I'm knitting on circular needles, I can knit flat. I can knit a flat scarf the traditional way. And how you do that is you start off with your yarn on the left, and you work all of your stitches until you get to the end. And then you turn your work just like you would normally, and you go back, and you never join it. You always want to double check and make sure you're not joining it. That is knitting flat. And why that is nice on circular needles, if you're traveling, if you're on an airplane, or if you're on a subway or a bus, or if you're like at a park somewhere and you're knitting, you only have one set of needles to keep track of. You don't have two knitting needles, you might drop one. And look how easy this is. If you pull your work up on the wire, you're not going to drop any stitches, and you can just quickly throw that in your bag and everything's going to be fine. You're not going to drop any stitches. So sometimes it is nice to work flat on circular needles. I almost never use straight needles. Claire, do you ever really use straight needles, or do you use circulars?
I use circulars for pretty much all my knitting, even if it's not in the round.
Yeah, I almost do too. Sometimes if I'm doing a swatch, I'll do them on straight needles. I don't know why that seems a little better to me, but I'm going to say 95% of my knitting is on circular needles. Okay. So I just wanted you to know about that. But knitting in the round, remember, if you're knitting in the round, you have to make sure that your working yarn is coming from the right. And I'm going to show you that one more time. Lay everything out so that your stitches are all nice and flat. You saw me like kind of organizing them and making sure they were nice. I'm going to put my stitch marker on. My working yarn is coming from the right, which is very important. I'm going to knit my first two stitches, and I'm just a little more snug than normal, but not anything extreme. Just kind of give it that extra little tightness. And then after you knit a couple of stitches, I like to stop and double check, because anyone can make a mistake. And you can see I can't separate it where that stitch marker is because it is joined correctly. All right, I'm going to rest here for just a second and take any questions. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Can I make anything more clear? Was it confusing in any spot?
Oh, I know a question I had when I first started knitting in the round. When you are working on the circular needle, should your needle tips be closest to you or farthest from you?
You know, I'm gonna say it could be either. When I do it, I kind of hold mine like this, so they're kind of farther away. But you can also hold them like this so that they're closer. What do you do, Claire? I do it like this. Sometimes you end up knitting inside out, which is fine, and for Fair Isle, sometimes that's better. What do you think, Claire?
I was going to say, now I tend to hold them so the needles are closest to me and then the cord is like going out and around because, like you said, I think my first project in the round, I held the needles farther away from me and I knit the whole pair of leg warmers inside out.
Yeah. So, and this is one of those things that it's not right or wrong, but sometimes you might get a better result one way or another, and each person might get a different result. So the way you're doing it might not be the best way for me to do it or somebody else. So this is something that as students are practicing, they can decide which one is going to be best for them, don't you think?
Yeah, I think as long as you realize, if you are holding the needles, I suppose you could do it even with the needles closest to you, but depending upon like where that fabric falls as you get more of it.
Yeah.
If you're seeing your knit stitches on the inside of the tube there, then you might accidentally be knitting inside out, but that's
Yeah. So
okay.
just kind of keep an eye on that and just kind of try it both ways and see which one's better. So, all right. So no other questions. And this is something that nobody told me when I was learning. I was told, make sure your stitches are not twisted. Go ahead and join in the round, and then everything's good. You can keep knitting, and you'll be a happy person. That's not true. I'm going to show you one thing that you need to double check. All right, so this is another little sample that I cast on. I knitted. All I did was I cast on, and then I knitted one whole round. And let's put this on here so it looks the same. So I just knitted my round. I'm going to slip my stitch marker because I just finished and I'm back to the beginning. Now my stitches were not twisted when I started. I double checked. So when you finish that first round, what I want you to do is lay your work down and double check and make sure it's not twisted. because you've only knit one round, it's only connected by one strand of yarn. And so it could still get twisted in your hand. See, I didn't know this when I started, and sometimes I would have things twisted. And I was like, I double checked, I made sure it was fine before I started, but sometimes it can twist in your hand during that first round. And now if I continued, I'm knitting a twist into my hat and it's ruined. So I can never be a hat at that point. So after you knit the first round, I want you to lay your work down in kind of it's not really a U shape anymore. It's more like just like a circle. Make sure that all of your stitches are facing the same direction and all of your loops are facing, the same direction. It's not twisted. And then I'm going to knit one more stitch. I'm going to pull that a little tight. And because now I have two strands of yarn kind of holding that, you can't twist it now, because with one strand, it's kind of like a hinge. You can kind of, you could force it to twist if you really tried to, but it's not going to twist on accident in your hand. So once you start the second round and you start knitting, you're kind of locked in place. You've either twisted it or you haven't twisted it. Hopefully you've made the right choice depending on the project you're making. But once you start that second round, you're locked in place. So before you start the second round, just double check and make sure everything is exact. So for a hat, you do not want to twist. No twist in it for a hat. All right, does that make sense? Anything to add to that, Claire?
Nope, I think you covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I didn't know that when I started, and I made many mistakes and I could not figure out why. And then finally I figured out that it can still twist on the second round. So always double check. Okay. Please. And so knitting in the round, let me show you what it looks like. So honestly, you're just knitting, purling. You can do SSK, you can knit two together, you can do yarn overs, you can knit in the front and back of the loop. You can do anything you want to do while you're knitting in the round, same as knitting flat. And stockinette stitch in the round is particularly easy because all you're doing is making knit stitches, and knit stitches going all the way around. So, and you can, if it's a hat, you'll probably be doing some type of ribbing, but this is basically what it looks like. You're just going round and round. Sometimes the stitches kind of get bunched up in your right hand, and then it kind of gets stretched around. So just take a second and kind of spread everything out again. And so then you're just knitting in the round. Whoops, I didn't. And if you're following a pattern, it will instruct you to like knit 2 inches of ribbing, knit 1, purl 1, or knit 2, purl 2, and then it'll say work the body of the hat in stockinette stitch for like 7 inches or 8 inches, whatever the pattern wants. And then you'll start your decreases at the top of the hat to close the hat up so that it's nice and warm. The way we're going to do it with decreases, it will make the hat smooth. It'll kind of close up kind of like a dome. So once you've knitted in the rounds, then you'll have the body of the hat done. And you can see I've got my stitch marker marking the beginning, and I've been working on my decreases. So once you've started your decrease rounds, and just what it sounds like, you're going to have less and less and less stitches. Every time you do a decrease, you'll have less stitches. And what happens is you end up, you don't have enough stitches for it to go all the way around. So you can see how far apart this is forcing my stitches. It's kind of stretching them. And if I want to continue knitting, I could still continue knitting with this situation, but you can see how it's stretching my stitches out. And sometimes that can distort your fabric, but it also makes it unpleasant. It's not flowing around. It's not, it's going to be very hard to continue on like this. So once you get to this point in your project, this is when you're going to switch to double pointed needles. and this is how you'll finish off the top of your hat. And I recommend doing it this way because this gives you a nice gentle introduction to double points. And I'm going to show you how to start the hat on double points from the beginning. But usually when people make a hat, they'll make the hat on 16-inch circulars because it's so much easier. And then you only switch to double points to just do the very top. Because, I mean, I like double points. I use them. It's my preferred method for like knitting small circles or small tubes, but nobody loves them. I mean, nobody really loves them, but you know, it's a good tool to have. So we don't necessarily want to do the whole project on double points. And so let me show you how. So you're going to switch to double points. So you're going to take one of your double points, and I'm using metal needles and wooden double points, but I would not do that on a real project. You would want to stay with metal or wood, whichever you're doing, because you can get a slight difference in gauge, right, Claire?
That is correct. Yes,
Yeah.
you want to make sure you're using the same material or type of needle throughout.
Yeah, but just for practicing, I didn't have all that handy. I do recommend wooden double pointed needles for beginners because they're a little bit less slippery and they're a little bit easier to kind of control your stitches. But, you know, you can use whatever you want, really. So I'm just knitting, you know, a certain number of stitches on each double point. And then I'm kind of letting that double point drop. I'm going to the next one. And I'm just going to knit some on and show you what that looks like here in a second. You prefer magic loop, right, Claire?
I do, yes. I do not like fiddling with all of these many different needles.
Most people do not. I
They
like
double points have their uses though. Like you said, if I'm doing like the top of a hat, then I probably would just switch to double pointed needles.
Oh, look here, I dropped a stitch. Let me pick up that stitch I dropped. So once you've knitted all of your double pointed needles onto your live stitches, and now we can get rid of this, we can just put this aside. This is what it's going to look like. So let me explain just a little bit about some of your options here. When you buy double pointed needles, usually they come in a pack of 5. And one thing you can do is you can have 4 needles on your work, and it's going to look kind of like a square. And then you'll use the 5th needle as your working needle. But how I usually prefer to do it, especially for something small like this, is I will use 3 needles to hold my work, my live stitches, and then it ends up like shaped like a triangle. Now the finished project's going to be a circle, but as you're working on it, it looks like it's in the shape of a triangle. That way you don't have as many needles to manage in your hand. Sometimes there are problems. I'm going to talk about that, about what happens in between the needles. So if you have less needles, you have less in between needles, and you can avoid that mistake a little bit easier. We're going to talk about. So I prefer to use 3 if it's a small project, and then use the 4th one for my working needle. Let me get this set up here. So here's my working yarn, and I'm not really going to use this double pointed needle. And one thing you can do is you can get these point protectors, and if you stick that on, then your stitches can't fall off. But that's why they're called double points, because they have a point on each end but no stopper. So you can use these like little, sometimes you can find real cute ones shaped like a teddy bear or whatever, but that's going to keep your stitches from sliding off the back when you're not looking. So, and I don't usually use these anymore, but when I first started learning, I really loved those. So, all right. So I'm going to let this needle rest. I'm not using this one. I'm using this is my working needle, and I'm going to be working with this needle. So even though we have 4 needles going, we're only using 2 at a time. So just remember that, only 2 at a time. And then you're going to knit like normal. However you knit, I wrap the yarn with my left hand. You might do it with your right hand. You might knit continental, you might knit British, you might knit Portuguese style. However you knit is the correct way. That's the correct way for you to knit. Just hold it in your hand, however you normally do it, and just knit like normal. When you knit the first 2 stitches on double points, you do want to make sure you're pulling it a little tighter. Again, nothing crazy or extreme. Otherwise, you can end up with slack stitches in between your needles, and it'll look like loose stitches and kind of like a ladder. And we don't love that. So even maybe the last stitch you can pull a little tight, but again, not extreme. So now I'm done with this needle. I'm going to turn my work. So here's my working yarn coming from this needle coming from the right. So the next needle I'm going to use will be the next one right here. So the next one in line. And so I'm going to let this needle rest, and I'm going to be working again just with 2. Pull that first stitch just a little tight. Pull that second stitch just a little tight. And then you're going to knit all of the stitches off of that needle onto the next one. Looks pretty easy when you're watching it, and after you practice a little bit, it will be easy. So it's not really hard, but it does take some practice. So now I've knitted all the stitches off of this one. I'm going to take my point protector. I'm going to just pop it on here. I'm going to turn my work. So find your working yarn. My working yarn is coming from this needle. So that means I'm going to use this needle. So I've got my working needle and my live stitches that need to be worked right here. Now I've got my little sock in the way, so I'm going to take that off to reveal the point. And then I'm going to knit again, just however you knit, whatever style, you just knit like normal. Pull those first 2 stitches just a little tighter than you normally would, and then keep going. So now I'm back to my green stitch marker. So that means I've finished 1 round. I've done all my knit stitches all the way around. And the next row, I would start my decreases again. So frequently when you make a hat, and this is always depending on the pattern, but a lot of times you'll knit 1 round without any decreases, and then the next round decreases, and it kind of alternates like that. That's a general rule. Again, the pattern will tell you, but that's pretty much all it is. And then I would keep going until, I do my decreases, and then the pattern will tell you, continue until you have 3 stitches on each needle, total of 9 stitches, and then you'll finish the hat. So any questions about what we've covered? How do we start on double pointed needles? We continue, and no, I'm sorry, we started with circular needles. We started with this circular on the bottom. We joined, we knitted in the round, we continued for the whole body, and then we switched to double pointed needles to finish. What questions? Any questions at all here? Happy to review anything and go over it again.
Give everybody a few minutes for typing here.
And I do encourage you to practice this there, because it's going to make a lot more sense when it's actually in your hand. So, but it will make more sense when you're doing it.
Oh, Michelle has a good question. I think you touched on this briefly. How do you know when to switch over from circulars to the double points?
Usually your pattern will not, sometimes the pattern will tell you, but the time to switch is when you start noticing. So like, see this one right here, I've got all my stitches on, and they see how they fill up all the space, and that they're very easy to go around. But if you start noticing that your stitches are spread apart like this, and to go all the way around, you have to kind of stretch them, that's the time to change. Or if you notice that, oh, this isn't really, like, what's wrong? Like, why aren't my stitches sliding on the needle? Why are they dragging? Why is it hanging up? That's because your stitches are too tight and they're stretching, and they're not going to slide on the needle nicely. That's when you change. Or, just, you don't want your stitches spread apart. So, once you start noticing them kind of stretching out, how would you word that, Claire? Is that?
Yeah, when your stitches start to feel like too tightly stretched around the needle. Yep.
Yeah, because, and I always worry that if it's stretching, it might not be giving you a nice, it could change your gauge. It's not going to continue the same way. It might not look as nice. So any other questions?
Yeah. Molly wants to know, how do you know which of the double pointed needles that you're knitting on? Or how do you know which is next in the sequence?
So let's just say like you were working on this hat, you put it away, you haven't knitted on it, you started 2 other projects, and like 6 months later, you bring this hat back out to finish, starting to get cold or whatever. You have no idea what you've been doing. It's been a long time ago. What you want to do is you want to find your working yarn. So I've got my working yarn here. My working yarn is coming from this needle. And if I were just knitting normal, honestly, the next stitch I would have to do would be this one, right? Because here's my working yarn, there's the next needle. But, I'm not knitting stitches from here to here. I'm going to knit them onto my working needle. So I'm knitting stitches from here to my working needle. But the way that I know that is because my working yarn is right here. So my working yarn is here. I'm going to be knitting stitches from this needle onto my working needle. Does that make sense? It will make more sense when you have it in your hand, though, I do promise. I hope that answered the question.
And then while you still got the top of your hat out.
And the working yarn is now here. The next needle I'm going to knit from will be the next one in line. So here's my working yarn, here's my next stitch, and here's my working needle. So that's kind of how you do it. Does that make, was there another question, Claire?
Yeah. While you've got the top of your hat out there, Kathy wants to know what happens at the end when you finish all your decreases and you're ready to get the stitches off of the needles.
Well, that depends on the pattern.
Each
each pattern could have you ending the hat in different ways. Again, we're not working from a specific pattern here. Frequently, what will happen is they will, once you get down to a certain number of stitches on the top, maybe it'll say continue until you have 9 stitches, 12 stitches, 20 stitches, whatever they are. You're going to cut your yarn, but I'm not going to cut this because I'm going to use this for another class. You would cut the yarn, leaving a fairly long tail. And then you would take the tail from, it's connected to your project, put it on a large eye blunt needle. And then you slide the stitches off one at a time onto your needle, and then you can push them down onto the yarn. And then once you get them all on there, you'll just pull it up, you'll just cinch it up really tight, close up the top, and then weave in your ends. So that's all. But that's not always going to be the case on every hat. So there could be different situations on each hat. So that's why this class is about knitting in the round, showing you, but it's not necessarily this is the only way to make a hat. So there's many, many ways of ending a hat, but that's probably the most frequent way, wouldn't you think, Claire?
Yeah, I think that's typically how it's done.
Most typical way. I think that's what I meant. Frequently, you'll see that hat, probably that ending mostly. Okay. Anything else?
I think we're ready to move on to our next technique. We've got about 20 minutes left in class.
All right. So if you, so the differences now what we're going to be looking at is starting a hat or starting a project on double pointed needles. Okay, so double pointed needles and magic loop give you the ability to knit very, very small tubes. Okay, so these are very big needles, but the needles can be very tiny, like the size of like sewing needles, like pins or something. So you could knit very, very small tubes to make the fingers for a glove. So that would be very small. You could knit very small tubes to make the arms for a teddy bear, something like that. A baby sock. How big is a newborn baby sock? It's tiny. So a very, very small tube for the baby sock. Baby hats are small, it may be 12 inches. So you could do, a very, very small tube for stuff like that. That's basically or even a sock. A sock is usually only about what 6 or 7 inches round, the most. You can't do that on circular needles. So you have to learn a way to knit small tubes in the round so that you can, you don't want to seam everything, and this makes it a lot easier. So here is, let me demonstrate this. So I'm going to cast on all my stitches on just one needle. So let me do 3, 4, and you can use whatever cast on you want. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I cast on 15. I'm going to put 5 on each needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's nice if you can put the same amount on each needle. So I'm going to put 5 on. I'm working with 3 needles. I'm going to put 5 on each needle. Everything's balanced and very nice. So, but maybe what if you had 17 stitches? You couldn't divide that evenly by 3. So you can, some of the needles might have more or less stitches on them. And then sometimes your pattern will tell you, cast on 20 stitches, put 5 on one, 10 on one, and 5 on the other one. For some reason, they want you to break it up, and then they'll have you doing different things for different reasons that will become important. So again, that's something your pattern will tell you. But usually, a general rule, you want your stitches to be pretty much fairly evenly balanced. It makes it go around the circle a little smoother, I think. Don't you think so, Claire?
Yeah, if the pattern doesn't specify, then I just try to divide them up as evenly as possible.
Yeah, and if you have 1 or 2 on another one that's more or less, it's fine. Okay, so knitting in the round, once you get the hang of it, like once you learn the basics, it's all the rules are pretty much the same. So we're always going to be working on the front of our project. We're going to be working in spirals. We have to join in the round correctly. So I want you to lay it out like this. Again, it's kind of in this U shape. Make sure all of your stitches are facing the same way. Or, if the pattern says 1 twist, then you can put 1 twist in it. But usually, like most projects, are going to want no twist. So learn, get comfortable with that. Make sure that everything's not twisted. It's crucial because if you're making a sock and you put a twist in it, it's not going to work. So make sure that it's not twisted. I have my 3 needles. And again, you could do 4, but I like to work with 3 better. It's going to be in the shape of a triangle while I'm knitting. My working yarn is on the right again. So this is my left and this is my right, and the working yarn is coming from the right. That's very important if you're trying to join. I don't think anybody would ever knit a flat project on double pointed needles. So like that whole theory about knitting flat on circular needles is kind of out the window for double points. Nobody would do it. Would anyone do that, Claire? Nobody would do that, would they?
I can think of one exception, but it's a very specific technique that we're not going to cover today. So,
okay, yes. Yeah, don't bring up any crazy techniques that I may have never heard of. All right, so then this is my working needle. This is the one with no stitches on it. So I'm going to enter the first stitch on the needle towards the left. And then I'm going to knit, and it is kind of fussy and it is kind of fiddly. So brace yourself for that. So I'm going to knit the first stitch and then the second stitch. And just because there are so few stitches, I'm just going to go ahead and knit all of them. And you can see they kind of turn in your hand a little bit. You kind of get used to that. So I've got all my stitches off of this. Everything kind of looks in a jumble. So you can lay everything out again and kind of reorganize, kind of look at what you're doing, make sure you understand what's happening, as you're learning. Okay, so I can't put it in a U shape anymore because look, it joined. So I've successfully joined it. So that's good news. I didn't put my stitch marker on to mark it. So I'm going to pop. If you put your stitch marker here at the beginning, it's going to fall right off. obviously. So you can either put it like one stitch in, or you can clip it to the stitch and then just kind of move it up as you go. If you forget about this stitch marker and you don't put it on, you can still find the beginning because you've got this tail. So you can kind of follow the tail up. Like if once your project's like 10 inches long or whatever, you can kind of follow that up and find the beginning or the end. But it's nice to have a stitch marker. Okay. So I did this one. So you turn your work to the next available needle. Here's my needle with no stitches. And then for the first 2 stitches, you do want to pull it a little more snug so you don't get those loose stitches in between. And then keep going. Okay, this is my new working needle with no stitches. And here's my work. Go ahead and lay it down to make sure you know what you're doing. Here's my working yarn. So once you find your working yarn, you know this is the next needle right here, because that's, you can't skip to here. So that's the most logical step. Usually the most logical or the most obvious answer is usually correct in knitting. And people don't like to believe that, but it's really pretty true. So first 2 stitches, pull a little more tight. Pull, tighten everything up just a little smidge. And then you can take your stitch marker and advance it to the next stitch, or you can do that every other time, or you don't have to do it every time, but there. And so you can see I knit the first row. It's only joined by that one strand, which is very easily turned. So I could, it could end up getting twisted. So before you start the second round, you do want to just take a second here. It might save you a big heartache later on, big problems. But make sure you can see that my loops are all facing this way and that my stitches are all on the inside. Nothing is twisted. And if you're using these, it's nice to kind of keep them. I used these a lot when I first learned, but after you get a little more practice, you'll be surprised you won't need those as much. But I was desperate for these when I first learned. Did you need these, Claire, when you were first learning?
I used those, but then I kept losing them. So I would also just wrap a rubber band around the end of the needle, and that
Yeah,
works as well.
I can't tell you how big of a miracle it is that I still have 3 of these. I've had these for like 20 years. I can't even imagine that I've kept them that long. So I finished my first round. My working yarn, let me lay this down so you can see. Here's my tail. Here's my tail. My working yarn is coming from here. And so I'm going to advance to the next needle. That's the only thing that makes sense, right? You can't go here or here, so you have to advance to the next needle. If I were purling, I'd have my yarn in the back, or I'm sorry, in the front. But if I'm knitting, I'd have my yarn in the back. Whatever stitch you're going to do, just position your yarn correctly and keep going. Pull that first stitch just a little snug. Nothing extreme. Second stitch, just a little snug, and then keep going. And then what you're going to end up with is a very narrow tube that might be like, this could be maybe the sleeve of a baby sweater, or maybe this is going to turn into the arm of a teddy bear or something. So, it could be a sock for maybe like a 2-year-old. Seeing I got my push protector there, so I'll take it off. All right, what questions? I'm going to finish this needle, and then what questions do you guys have? Do you want to see it again from the beginning, from me casting on, or did it make sense? Or
We've got about 10 minutes left in the class, so I want to make sure we get through Magic Loop and any questions. Just a reminder, if you do have to duck out before the end of the class, we are recording it, so you can come back and watch anything you missed when that is posted on the Michaels website or the Michaels YouTube channel.
all right, so practice this. You might think it looks very intimidating, and it is a little. When you get this in your hand, you might think this is crazy. I hate this, but do try to practice it, put it down, come back to it. Give it a couple of rounds, go have a cup of tea, maybe the next day, give it another try. Don't get super frustrated, but do try. This is something that's very good to know, and I really think that you will benefit from it. So, it is a little fiddly and fussy at first, but once your hands get used to it, it's actually much easier than it looks. So I'm gonna let this here for just 1 second. So if you absolutely hate this with your entire soul and being, and you want to burn every double-pointed needle you ever find, that might be how you feel, and you're justified in that. Another way you can do this exact same thing, and it's a different technique, it's called magic loop. So this is what you would use if a second choice. So we're getting rid of this because we don't want, maybe you don't want to use that. So, but a magic loop is going to make it so that you can knit a very tiny tube. Again, exactly the same as double pointed needles, a sock, a baby hat. You only really need to learn one of these. So if you try both of them and you hate one, you don't have to learn both. They do the same thing, but it's nice to know both. All right. So with magic loop, and Claire, you watch me close on this one because I like double points better. So make sure I'm doing it the way you like. So with magic loop, you're going to use a very long cable. So this one is 40 inches long from tip to tip. So from the tip of this needle all the way around and then back to the tip of this one is 40 inches. And you can use sometimes depending on what you're doing, I've made this work with 16-inch circulars. I do not recommend it. I would think you need at least like 20, I would say 32-inch. What would you say to be the smallest, Claire? Which is a good idea.
Yeah, 32-inch is usually the smallest that I can comfortably go with magic loop.
Yeah, I did it with 16 before, just finishing the top of a hat or something. It wasn't comfortable and I don't recommend it, but you can make things work. So I cast all my stitches on one needle. And then you take your stitches and you pull them, you fold your cable in half and you pull them back here. And you divide them in half. I'm not going to count them. That looks like half. Or maybe I'll put one more over here. It doesn't really matter so much, but again, you kind of want them balanced if you can. And then you're going to pull them out. And now I have half of my stitches on one needle, half of my stitches on the other needle. Depending on how you hold it, how you think of it, my working yarn is either in the back, or if you hold it like this, it's on the right-hand side. Okay, so you want to make sure what we want is we want this working yarn to connect to this stitch, because right now they're not connected, so we want to join that. So let's look and see how we're going to do it. So you're going to take the back needle, take this needle, and you're going to pull it out to just give yourself enough flexibility to work. So what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a loop on one side and then a loop kind of like on the back or the front or the left or the right, however you want to think about it. And then, you're going to knit the first stitch off of your other needle. And again, knit or purl. Now I'm wrapping with my right hand just to kind of show you, you can do it however you knit. This is not the way I normally knit. It's very slow, but Claire, you do with your right hand, but you flick it on your finger and it's super fast.
Yep. Everyone has a little bit different technique, but whichever way works best for you.
Okay, so then that's what you end up with, which looks like a big mess. So it's going to get tangled up. It's going to get twisted like this, especially when you're learning. You're going to be like that. That is not right. That can't be right. So, but what I want you to do when you get to this point is, it's called the home position. I call it the home position. You just want to pull all of your stitches back up on your needle. So get everything kind of repositioned, kind of the way you started. My stitches got a little tight. And so now I'm in the home position. It's pretty much how I started. My working yarn again is in the back. My stitches are not twisted. Again, you always want to double whenever you're doing double points or knitting in the round in any of the forms with magic loop, double points, or circulars, always make sure your stitches are not twisted. It's crucial. Okay. So now I'm going to pull the back one out again. I've got my loops. Are these the magic loops, Claire? Where is the magic loop we hear so much about? Is that what this is? Is this the magic bit?
Yeah, I think the magic bit is those loops on either side. And I always think they look a little bit like giant mouse ears.
Do you need to know any magic words? Will that make it easier?
No magic, just practice.
I feel like magic words might make it more fun though. So if you make up some magic words, it might be more fun. Okay, so you can see right now, I'm just knitting like normal. Everything's normal. I'm having a delightful time. I'm getting to my last stitch. Everything's going so well. And then I'm going to look at this again. That looks like a big mess, right? That can't be right. All right, so let's get back to the home position and see what we're dealing with. So surprisingly enough, it is right. So don't, if things look really messy in your hand when you're first trying this, don't lose heart because it might be going all right. So there's my working yarn right here in the front now. So I usually have my working yarn on the back needle. And you see I'm connected with that one string, but because it's my first round, I could still twist it. So, double check and make sure it's not twisted. It's a little easier to see on these, I think, because you've just got the two needles. So I'm going to pull the back needle out, position your yarn correctly, and then just continue on. And my main advice is after you knit the stitches off of each needle, return to the home position, get everything lined up nice so that you can see what you're doing, because it's easy to get lost in it and lose track of where you are, and then you'll feel like you've mixed it up and you'll feel like you need to rip it out and start over because that doesn't look like anything. So just don't give up until you've double checked everything. Okay. And then just keep going. And if you're you'll get better than me because I don't practice this very often. It will look much more graceful in your hand and it will be very nice. Okay. And after you practice that for a while and keep going, it's going to look like this. I keep working. This cable is not as flexible, so just make sure you're getting a really nice flexible cable. I mean, this will still work. There's my working yarn, so I'm going to pull my needle out. And now I've got two needles to work with. Position your yarn in the correct spot for whatever stitch you're doing. And again, you can do knits, you can do purls, SSK, knit two together, knit front and back of the loop, yarn over, anything you want. You could be doing fair isle, lace, cables, anything you want. And then just keep going. And this one has more stitches on it, so it's not going to go as fast, but that's all it is. What questions do we have about this? We've got 1 minute. We're actually over by 1 minute. Any questions?
Let's see if we can get through some fast. Do you cast on everything all at once?
Oh, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Do you cast on all of your stitches at once?
I do. Like if I were casting on this, say you're making a sweater sleeve and you need to cast on 25 stitches, I would cast all 25 on this needle and then fold it in half, slide them down and put 12 on one side and 13 on the other side or something. But I would cast them. Do you cast them on all at once, Claire? How do you do it?
Yeah, I answered this in the comments too. You would cast on everything all at once, and then I make sure and put all of that stitch on the cord. I like slide it to the middle of the cord. And then sometimes I count to make sure that it's extra even. And sometimes you can sort of eyeball it and then yank that loop of the cord out between the two stitches in the middle.
Yeah, so you kind of fold it like this. So here's all my stitches. It's kind of hard to see when it's already knitted, but then you divide half of your stitches on one side and half on the other side, and then pull it out. Okay. Any
And
other
then
questions?
Kathy has a good question. Is it better to use this method when your project has more stitches? I'm having a hard time understanding when to use this.
So honestly, I think that is a good point. If you were making something with more stitches, like maybe you were making a sleeve of a sweater and up close to the shoulder, you might have maybe you have 50 stitches or maybe 100, depending on how big your yarn is or whatever you're making. Maybe it's a dolman sleeve and it has a lot of stitches. And you want to do it in the round, this would probably be better because on double points, you're going to be more likely to drop stitches if you have a lot of them. Other than that, the time you would use magic loop versus double points, it's really your personal choice. Mostly they do the exact same thing. Some people like double points better, some people like magic loop better. So usually you can do one or the other. You don't really need to know both, but I'd like knowing both just because sometimes one, like if you don't have double pointed needles, you can make this work or something. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. We had another one sort of, do you want it, can you use magic loop every time you need to knit in the round? Certainly, I think, if you're knitting the body of a sweater in the round, that's probably not the best application because you're going to have enough stitches to go all the way around that 32 or 40-inch circular.
Yeah. It just like if you wanted to make a hat and you are going on a vacation and you're making a hat on, size 9 needles, you might not want to bring double points because what if you lose them? You don't want to have to fuss around with everything. You could make an entire hat if you cast it on magic loop, and then when you get to the top and you get down to like just a few stitches, and you can close the entire hat up, do the whole thing on magic loop. That's a good idea, if you want to do it that way. Do you do that, Claire? The whole hat on magic loop?
No, I actually like doing my hats on 16-inch circulars because
Yeah.
then I don't have to always fiddle with the cord.
Yeah, but you could. But yeah, usually I only use magic loop or double points if I'm only using small, like a small tube or closing up a tube. I don't love either one of them enough to do them just for fun. I don't know if anyone does.
All
Okay,
right,
what
I
else?
put the handouts in the chat here one more time. I'll go ahead and do that again in case anybody missed them. And then I also put Darren's contact information there. If you have any questions after we end.
Yeah, so if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me. Instagram is really the best. If you don't have Instagram, you can send me one on Facebook. Send me like a direct message on Facebook. And Claire, it's my screen name on Instagram is Mr. Woolly Bear. So Claire put that in the chat. On Facebook, it's just my name spelled out, and you'll see my picture. So just feel free to send me a question. I usually can answer them pretty quick. I don't get very many, so I don't mind helping. I hate the thought of somebody being like struggling with this technique, and if you have a simple question, I could answer it fast, and then you could keep practicing. So yeah, don't hesitate. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Anything else?
I think we're good. Just remember to practice, 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 everybody.
That's when all the learning happens, really. So, all right, if you have questions, let me know. Thanks for coming to class.